Ichniowski. Fred, you've been a business consultant. You've mentored people. You've coached people. We're going to get into that in a minute.
All
what
right.
the difference is. All right.
Great.
But one of your big claim to fame things is you are a commentator for boxing. Right? Like that's part of your deal. Like, did you get hit enough times? Is that what happened? What happened? Like you got hit a bunch of times? Well, I might as well take up boxing, or
well, when I was
how do you end up doing that?
When I was a young guy, my dad worked 2-3 jobs, Bryce, when I was growing up. He was gone a lot. And I have 2 brothers. The 3 of us are less than 3 years apart. So we did everything together. And my mom and dad were, important to us. But, I wanted to connect with my dad, and he was gone a lot. But when there was boxing on the TV or even radio then, because, I'm an old guy.
Back in the day,
man, we used to listen to it. And when I was a real young guy, because that was one of those connections with my father, I really started enjoying the sport. And I can remember the first title fight I ever watched. Who was it? It was Roberto Duran, and he fought a guy named Kenny Buchanan, who was a Scottish guy, and Duran beat him and won his first championship. It was 19.
Yeah. Wow. When was that?
It was 1972.
Was that Duran Fists of Steel? Was it his
Hands of Stone? Hands of Stone.
That was one of those.
Yeah. So I really started following the sport then, and I fooled around with getting in it. But I had a lot of friends of mine who were like Golden Gloves champions in Arkansas when I was living there. And I ran a gym for a while, and I used to mess around with them, and they just slapped me around like nobody's business.
It's like, I better be a commentator.
I better do something else. I love about it.
I love it, but I'm going to comment. I'm going to just talk about it. Yeah.
I've been doing that on and off for, gosh.
Yeah.
What's plus years?
What's the best title fight you ever saw?
Oh my goodness. Wow. There's almost too many. This one is not the best fight, but it's the one I got the most gratification from. And it was when George Foreman recaptured the heavyweight title at age 45 against Michael Moorer. And George was taking a beating. And I really had a kinship with George because, God took over George's life. And George had lost to Evander Holyfield trying to win a championship. And everybody said, this was just Michael Moorer was making some money and George was a big name. And at 45 years old, in the 10th round, after taking a beating, George knocked him out. And I'll never forget, my wife was upstairs asleep. And it was after midnight, and I ran through the house yelling and screaming, and I bolted through the door, and I shook her and woke her up to tell her. And the look on her face was not an excitement level of championship. It was, are you out of your mind? What are you doing?
One of the greatest fights I ever saw, and this is back in the day. So you would know this. This is back in the late 70s. And it was, we used to, if you wanted to watch it, closed circuit, you had to go to a closed circuit. You went to a place.
Absolutely.
So I'm in a closed circuit, arena. I think it was in Anaheim, California. And so it was the Anaheim Convention Center or something. There must have been 7,000 or 8,000 crazy screaming guys there. I remember turning to my buddy and saying, nobody ever ought to attack America because we'll come out of here and it was Leon Spinks and Muhammad Ali.
Oh, I remember it well. The first one or the second one?
You know what? It was the first one where Spinks actually
Leon beat him,
won the fight.
Yeah.
He was shocked.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we went for the undercard. We were there for the whole thing,
Yeah.
And, but that's an amazing thing to be a part of that. So when you came to Christ, were you part of boxing or what was happening in your life at that point? And there's this change.
At that point, I was, I had met my wife. I was in college. Actually, I was a failing student in college. I really didn't have very much direction.
Well, college dropouts rule the world, so nonetheless.
Well, you know what? Maybe I would have been ruling the world a little earlier because I was just a horrible student, and
Really?
just, I didn't have much happening in my life, and I met my wife, and she gave me some direction. In fact, she laughs because she said she doesn't remember this. Now she says she does, but years ago she said, I don't remember doing that. I actually was put on academic probation at the college I was at when I first met her. And we were we knew each other for a few weeks. I couldn't believe this Christian girl hooked up with this guy that she had no reason to hook up with. And we planned on getting married. Like within 6 months, we were married. And just before we got married, I got word that I was basically academic probation out of school.
Wow.
And she came to me and she said, listen, God's got bigger plans for you, and I'm not going to be married to a loser because God has plans for you. Do you understand, buddy? And I faced this little 5'2", 205-pound woman scared to death. And I said, okay. And God started infiltrating into my life at that time. And my mother-in-law presented me with my first Bible. And I, said, I don't need this. I don't want this. And she said, no, honey, there's hope in here. So I want you to have this. And it is actually, Paul, my most treasured possession because my wife was one of 5 daughters, and the spread between them, I think, was 26 years.
Oh my goodness.
So her oldest sister was actually older than my parents.
Yeah.
So her mother, when I met her mother was in her mid 60s and we were in our early 20s. So the Bible she gave me had been her Bible for a long time, and her handwriting is in there. And
come on, man.
She had a stroke, and her handwriting was, and I'm tearing up because it's my most prized possession. And
so she gives you a Bible, and you're like, okay, if I want to keep this relationship with this girl, I got to figure this thing out.
Oh, well, you know what? My wife always knew that the Holy Spirit was going to get a hold of me and God had plans for me. And we were married a year before I got baptized. Really? So she didn't give up on me, and she knew God had a plan. And I remember I got baptized in a little creek in Ash Flat, Arkansas. That's where my wife came from, population 368 when I met her. And the plan was I was going to, someday maybe get baptized in the little Church of Christ there. And we're sitting down by the creek side, and I'm with family, and I'm with one of my brother-in-laws. And I said, man, I'm really feeling the Holy Spirit as I would interpret the Holy Spirit moving on me. I think I really need to get baptized. And I said, maybe, we'll call the pastor there at the church maybe tomorrow. And he goes, hey, buddy, we ain't waiting.
Yeah.
Right now, this moment, let's go. And I said, really? And he said, let's do it. So we walked from the bank out into the little creek, and I took the dunk, buddy. Yeah. And my life changed from there.
So Ash Flat, that's ASH. Ash Flat.
Yes.
So then, I just want to make sure I had that right. So but you didn't grow up in Arkansas.
No,
you ended up there because of your wife. Right?
Yeah, I was born in Chicago, lived there till I was 5 or 6, moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan, lived there for 5 or 6 years. And then my father was working for a company, and he was transferred to Fort Smith, Arkansas. And we thought we were going to the tip of Africa. I mean, to go from the upper Midwest thing to Fort Smith. The only knowledge we had of Fort Smith, Arkansas was True Grit. Remember the John Wayne version of True Grit? That came out, and the movie started in Fort Smith, Arkansas. So we got word that we were going to be moving there, so we went as a family to the outdoor theater to see True Grit. And He
Just
goes
to get a reference point.
oh, we had to have a reference point. So he's in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and he goes across the Arkansas River into the Indian Territory, and there's these giant mountains. Well, that was Colorado. When we got to Fort Smith and you went across the Arkansas River into the Indian Territories, there ain't no mountains.
Well, there is the Kiamichi Wilderness, but it's not really mountains.
So anyway,
So the magic of movies.
We ended up there, and I ended up, going to college in Arkansas, the University of Central Arkansas, and met my wife. And really, everything from there is where God started, using me and utilizing me, which was awesome. And my wife got me through school. I told you, man, I was a washout. And the last 2 years I was in school, I got I had a B average, which for me was giant. And everything came from that.
I saw a B once. And my best grade in college was withdraw passing. It was I don't know.
I had a lot of withdraws and dropped.
So here I am working on my second doctorate, but my best grade in college was withdraw passing. So you've been a coach, a mentor, but you've been in business. You've helped numerous businesses grow. You've been from outreach to family bookstores, Tim Tebow Foundation. Yeah. What were those assignments? Were those all basically helping people grow? Is that part of what you do then, Fred?
I want to preface that, and I'll make it quick, where I spent the first 20 plus years of my life, and I would call it the secular world. It's not bad. It's just, that's what I did.
General market. Yeah.
It was a general market piece, and I helped companies grow there. I was part of the team that started Barnes and Noble bookstores, which was really
out of here. Really?
Yeah, it was really a great learning experience. I was too young for what I had to do, but it was a great learning experience. And I tried, actually it was there that God said, I want you to get involved in ministry business. And I'll never forget my one of my best friends and I, still best friends after 30 plus years, great Christian guy. We were in a Barnes and Noble store and we saw a questionable book, Paul. And we both had little kids then. Our kids were little, and he looked at me and I looked at him and he said, man, our kids can come in here and look at this.
Yeah.
So I said, I need to do something. So I reached out to the Lord and I started applying for roles in Christian retail companies, and it took me 6 years to have someone talk to me.
Wow.
Because it was a closed market. And I said to myself, Lord, if you ever open up the opportunity for me to get into that marketplace, I'm going to open up that opportunity for people that it took me a long time to do. And I did that. Where'd
you learn your center of morality? Did that come from your father? Did it come? Because you were, I remember we were talking a bit ago about you grew up in a Catholic church. Yeah. Where did that center of morality come? Or was it sort of not there for a while? And then when you became a follower of Christ, it just kicked in? Where do you think that came from, Fred, as you think about this?
It was a combination of things. I think it was a combination of how I was raised. I mean, my dad was a really rough guy. He was very rough. But he had... he didn't even realize the Christian foundation that he had till much later in life. But
so he had ethics. In other words, he was a rough guy. Oh my gosh,
did he have ethics? Listen, man, the family was everything, and you worked. I told you one of my scriptures that's foundation is Proverbs 11:29. He who troubles his own family will inherit the wind. I saw my father have a work ethic that said, when you want something, it's your responsibility to get it. It's nobody else's responsibility. So if you want it, you work hard for it and you get it. And you take care of the family no matter what. And, raised in a parochial school environment.
But you saw that in your dad.
Oh, I absolutely saw that.
Probably part of the greatest generation, wasn't he?
He was. It was part of the greatest generation. Now, it was interesting. He never served in the military. His father wouldn't allow him. He was between World War II and Korea, and he tried to get into the military at 16 or 17. And his father, who was a Marine in World War II, wouldn't allow him to do it. But he was self-educated man, constantly reading. I have a voracious I'm a voracious reader, and I got that from my father because he was
Wow.
self-educated. He never finished high school, and he was always reading. And I would always say to him, especially as a teenager, man, it's go to bed, man. It's like 11:30. What are you reading? And he would say, well, son, nobody's going to educate you but yourself. And
Wow.
growing up, Paul, this is interesting. Every gift giving time, holiday, let's say it would be the three would be Christmas, Easter, and birthday. We always got a book along with
Wow.
whatever else we got, because you had to educate yourself.
Yeah. Wow. So your dad had this center, even though he didn't necessarily teach you the Bible, he had this ethical center.
He did.
And then you grew up in a parochial school, which means it was a Catholic based.
Yes, it was Catholic school, very high discipline. Those were the days when you got whacked over the knuckles with ruler, hair pulled, and but you know what? It was a disciplined environment, and it helped forge who I was. And when we were speaking earlier, I told you I didn't know Christ as I've known him over the last 40 plus years, but I knew he was real. And I absolutely knew he was real and he existed. And when I finally opened myself up, and it was an opening, I had to open myself up to that. But when I did, it just poured in. It just
What was that tipping point between where you just go, you know what, I have got to have something here? What was the tipping point? What was that moment? Usually there's some crisis.
There wasn't a crisis, but there was a moment. I had never been into any type of Protestant church prior to meeting my wife. And when I went up to meet her mother in Ash Flat, Arkansas, there was one church. It was a little Church of Christ. And I went in there, and the pastor was a young guy. He was my age. He was a fire and brimstone guy. And he kept saying this. He kept going, now listen to this. Now listen to this. And he was pointing at me. I kept thinking, this guy, man, is pointing at me. And I actually got up and left right in the middle of the service. And I told my wife, I said, do you actually believe all of this? And she said, yeah. And I went, adios. And I got up in the middle of the service and I left. And I was walking across the street to their little house that her daddy built with his bare hands. He was a carpenter. And I started going, I started thinking, now listen to this. I got mad at that, but I started going, I kind of
maybe
get
there's something there. Wow.
Maybe there's something there. And it was that night when my mother-in-law gave me that Bible.
That Bible. Golly. So now you work for 6 years. You've worked in the general market, sales, strategy, ops.
Yeah.
Now you're trying to get for a number of years. You said 6 years. You're trying to get into what we would call a Christian-owned business or something.
Yeah.
And where'd that thing break, and what happened then?
You know, it was interesting. It's totally God. I was going to work for a new company that was just starting. He had recruited me and wanted me to come work for him and, take over a big piece of the company. And I literally, this is the truth, I was living in Highland Village, Texas, there in Dallas. I was walking out the door to start this new role, and the phone rang. I was walking out the door, and my wife answered the phone, and I had the door open, walking out to my car, and she said, this call's for you. And I said, honey, I got to go. And she goes, no, this is more than just a phone call. You need to take this call. And
Wow.
I went in and I picked up the phone, and it was the president of Family Christian Stores.
Wow.
And he said, Fred, this is Les Dietzman was his name. He said, your resume has been floating around here for a long time, and we are getting ready to expand the company, and we need some help. And would you have any interest at all after all these years of talking to us? Paul, I was walking out the door and that phone call came in. And here's what I did. I totally walked on faith. I went to that new organization. I walked in and I said, today's my final day. It's my first day and my final day. And they went, what? And I said, yeah. and I can't explain it to you because if I did, you wouldn't understand it.
Yeah.
But it's my first day, my final day, and that's how God moved me into this place where for the next 28 years, I've been impacting lives for Christ at a level I never thought. I've had the ability to impact millions of lives for Christ through either products that I sold or teams that I've coached.
Yeah.
Or it's incredible. It's humbling to me. I sometimes can't get my arms around how God has done that because I'm just a goof. Look at me.
So you helped, but you helped a lot of different organizations.
I have.
And,
I've had a chance to work with lots of organizations.
Yeah, some of them I know. And so your leadership development strategy,
Yeah.
Mentoring, coaching. When we get into that, you helped Tim Tebow with his organization.
Yep.
So that he seems to be a real guy.
He is a real guy. It's interesting when the president of the Tebow Foundation, his name is Steve Biondo, and Steve and I work together at Family Christian Stores, and we're just great buddies. And he called me and said, "Hey, man, I need your help over here." And I said, "You know what, Steve? I love you. You and I have been buddies a long time, but I'm not coming over there unless I believe Timmy is for real."
Yeah.
I said,
right.
So we got on the phone and talked for a couple hours, and yeah, in fact, Friday night, I am going to be in Fort Smith, Arkansas, driving a limousine at the Night to Shine event, which is the big event for the Tebow Foundation, where special needs folks all over the world from early teens to 80 years old get to have a prom night experience.
Yeah.
And I drive
our partners in ministry, Ferris Abraham, who's our partner in Cairo, Egypt, his entire team will be doing a Night to Shine in Cairo, Egypt, on Friday. So so very familiar with it. And when I was there last year, working on the ministry things we do for men there with the Christian Men's Network in Cairo, met with a number of his team, saw some of the things they've done, and what that Night to Shine has done is impact general culture. So people see this giving, this special moment for special needs young men and women, and it is not only something to be involved in, but something that really shines a light of Christ to the local community.
It really does, and that's what the point of that is.
Yeah,
it shines the light of Christ, and I think this is year 6 that I'll be driving a limousine with a buddy of mine.
Awesome.
Since we were little kids, and he and I drive a limo together. I have to share a quick story. I just have to. Last year, driving the limo, there's a special needs guy. He's probably 70 plus years old.
Oh, wow.
He gets in the limo and he's got a date. Okay, he's got a date with me. And, I'm kind of I'm the fun guy. And I'm like, "Hey, everybody, I'm glad you're in here with us. And, we're going to take this loop around and drop you back off." And I said, "How many folks have been in a limo before?" And, some people raising their hand. "Yeah, I did last year." And this guy says, "Hey, mister." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Could you keep it down? I'm operating back here with my girlfriend." I tell you, man, that's one of the funniest things in my whole life. And I go, "Excuse me?" And he goes, "Keep it down. I'm operating back here."
I got something going on. Man. Don't get in the way. I don't need a wingman. I'm good.
Oh, it's an incredible blessing. But yeah, I got to, I've even though I don't do work with the Tebow group anymore, I'm still in contact with them. And that I'll never miss that till God takes me. I'm going to be doing that.
That's fantastic. So now in your leadership development, one of the things that you and I and Bryce, our producer, talked about was the difference between mentoring and coaching.
Yeah.
Actually, what happened was, we're talking about coaching because your son is a coach, football coach, right? How many children do you have?
I have 2. I have a son and a daughter.
Yeah.
They're about a year and a half apart.
Really? And so your son's a coach.
Yep.
Football
coach and high school teacher.
Tahlequah, Oklahoma.
Yes. The Tahlequah Fighting Tigers.
It's the Fighting Tigers of Tahlequah. I want that t-shirt, man. I mean, doesn't that sound like the coolest thing? The Fighting Tigers of Tahlequah.
When I started doing work with the Tebow group, my son, will have hats for me and sweatshirts. And I was wearing a hat that had TT on it for Tahlequah Tigers. And, I fly up to, I forgot where Tim was playing minor league baseball at the time, and we flew up.
Yeah.
I spent some time at his house, and I had on, and I didn't even think about it. I had on my Tahlequah Tigers hat, and everybody was like, "How did you get a Tim Tebow hat?"
Tim Tebow.
To you, man, but it's the Tahlequah.
Yeah. Well, if you were from down where I live in Fort Worth, it would have been Texas Tech. Everybody would have thought it was that. Right. Yeah. Wouldn't have thought of Tim. Hey, but your son's a coach.
Yep.
You've coached basketball. Boxing, all these different things. And then we also talked about how you've mentored a lot of people.
Yes.
All right, here we go. Here's the big question. Sounds to me like they're the same thing.
Well, that's a statement that many people make because, I've got to help lots of organizations, and people will always say, yeah, we want our leaders to be coaching and mentoring. Coaching and mentoring is a big part of helping, bringing leaders. And I said, well, be careful.
As if it's the same skill set.
Yeah, it's different. And here's the way I define it for organizations that I help. Let's say you're Dak Prescott and you're the quarterback for the Cowboys.
Let's use another one. Dude, come on, man. Seriously.
Okay, let's say you're the quarterback for any team.
Let's say Purdy, with San Francisco or something.
Yeah. And you go to the 49ers, and when you go to the 49ers, there's a quarterback coach.
Okay.
He's your coach. You don't choose him. You don't get to choose that coach.
No.
That's your coach.
He's your skills coach. Yeah.
You live with that coach. So coaching is that choice is made for you often who your coach is going to be. But your mentor is different. You get to choose your mentor. And your mentor affects your life at a much deeper level than what a coach normally would. Because to choose I've had lots of people ask me to be a mentor, and I'll go, I don't know you well enough, and you don't know me well enough, because there's a real personal stake in a mentorship. And it is deep and abiding to the people who do it together. So I'm very careful, Paul, about who I'll take on, from a mentoring standpoint, because coaching and mentoring are different. Mentoring, you have to take a personal stake. You have to care. You have to be there 24 hours a day. And I have been, and people have been for me. And that's a long-term sustainable, hopefully, relationship. And I believe God brings those people together. So I always tell folks, be careful to not use coaching and mentoring as the same thing, because they're not interchangeable. They're two separate things.
When you mentor, okay, let's go to that, because I've got a number of friends. There's probably a few guys listening who say, I know that I should be a mentor in this young man's life. Let's say it's somebody in your business, or it's somebody that at church who might be a son of a single mom. And you go, I should be a mentor, but I don't know what to talk to him about. Do I just talk to him about the football game? Brock Purdy or Dak Prescott, God bless the man, because I'm a Cowboys fan. So, but anyway, but you know what I'm saying? How do I actually start that conversation? To be a mentor.
To me, the starting of that is to understand, and I do it in kind of different levels. Okay. I want to understand if they're a husband, what's happening with you as a husband? What's happening with you as a father? What's happening with you as a son? What's happening with you as a brother? What's happening with you? What's your business? What's happening with you there? Who do you lead? Because everybody leads. That's another thing I don't think. Everyone is a leader.
Everyone has influence.
Absolutely, positively. Everyone has influence. So I kind of fill that profile out. And then I start going, well, how are you doing as a father? How are you doing as a husband? How you doing? When my kids were really little, and it changed my life, I used to say, you know what, we're going to have a monthly session. And I would ask my wife, how am I doing as a husband? And I'd ask my kids, how am I doing as a dad? And, it was kind of self-serving, because I was kind of arrogant, going, they're going to tell me that I'm this.
You're awesome.
My son was maybe 8 or 9. And I traveled a lot, man, in my professional career. I
Right.
like 4 million miles in the air and all this.
Wow.
I was gone a lot. And I thought building companies, I thought that's what God wanted me to do. But he stopped me in my tracks about my family. He who troubles his own family will inherit the wind. But I had my session with my son. I'll never forget it. It was in Highland Village. And I said, all right, son, how am I doing as a dad? And this little face was like right in front of me. And he welled up with tears and he goes, you know, Dad, why don't you do the things that you say you're going to do?
Oh, wow.
And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the last couple of weekends, you said we were going to shoot hoops on Saturday, and you just always said you had something else to do, or you'd be working in your office.
Wow.
And how come you don't do the things you say you're going to do? And, you know, for a little 8 or 9-year-old boy to face his father, you know, it's always kind of that, you know, it's Dad. And he did. And he was welled up with tears, and it makes me well up with tears. It changed my life.
Wow.
And I went, you know what, son? You're right. You just taught me something I needed to learn. So when I start working with folks as a mentor, I want to understand all the different facets and all the different hats that they wear, whether they're, you know, a man or a woman. I want to understand all of that. And then I just simply ask discovery questions, Paul, just to let folks self-discover. And that always opens up the doors to what God wants me to help folks with.
You know, it's interesting that when Jesus taught, many of the ways he taught most often was a question, by way of questions.
Yeah.
Do they say, have you heard? You know, and so perhaps sometimes what we do is we think we have to have answers, when really what we need is just a few of the right questions.
Yeah. I felt one of my first mentors taught me that discovery questions, which lead to self-discovery, it's the most valuable thing you can do as a coach and as a mentor. So I do that a lot. I just ask a lot of discovery questions, and it's kind of neat when you're with somebody and you see them self-discover. And you ask the question, and then you just quick to listen, slow to speak. Then you're just quiet, and you can see them start to self-discover. And if they're a man or woman of God, you can see the Holy Spirit working on them. But that mentoring relationships allows for that intimacy where a coach, you might not. A mentor allows for intimacy where you trust that person implicitly and go, I'm willing to bear myself to this individual. So
coaching could actually morph a mentoring situation.
It could. It really could. And most of those people that I want to say all those people that I now mentor, I was their coach at one point. They were either someone I hired or someone I worked with in an organization. I've done a lot of work with John Brown University, which is a private Christian university. I think I've been doing work with them for 12, 13 years now. And a lot of those students met me when I was speaking to them, just in a generic sense, and they became ingrained. And some of them I still, after all these years, mentor, and they'll get a hold of me. And sometimes it's twice a year, or sometimes it's an email going, man, I really need, can you give me some wisdom? And you know what my wisdom is? I ask them a bunch of questions and help them self-discover.
Yeah, my daughter attended there, JBU, Siloam Springs.
JBU? Cool.
Yeah, she finished actually University of North Texas.
We lived there in Siloam Springs, where JBU is. We lived there for many years.
It's a great school.
Yeah, I worked with Dayspring Cards, which is Christian Cards. I worked for Dayspring for many years, and that's how I got hooked up with JBU.
Oh my goodness, isn't that wild? Yeah. So asking questions, you know, the thing is that, so it's not so much as having the right answer as having a starting question.
Yes.
And then listening, because what we have a tendency to do, and this is maybe it's a Western culture thing. I think it is, and probably an American thing more than anything else. Because like you, I've traveled over 80 countries. And I think we do this a lot in the U.S. As somebody's talking, we're formulating our answer. So we're not necessarily listening to their answer to our question. We're moving on to our next thing. So when you say, what was it? Quick to speak, slow to answer.
Quick to listen and slow to speak.
Quick to listen, slow to speak. Yeah, there we go. I'll get that. Say it again. Quick to listen and slow to speak. Slow to speak. Okay. So if you're working out at the gym right now, you're listening to the podcast and talking with Fred, that's something for you to kind of maybe click a little thing there. It'll be in the show notes. Bryce will put it in the show notes and we'll have it on there because, man, that's huge. I would say that that's how you keep your marriage together. Sorry, I just pivoted. I pivoted the marriage.
And I open my big mouth and I don't practice that, I get in trouble. Now, I'm going to say this, and people can throw buckets of water on me if they ever see me on the street. I would be willing to say probably 95% of the time my wife's right. And,
wow.
It's hard.
That's impressive.
It's hard. It was hard for me early, but when I learned to go, just listen.
Yeah.
Just listen. Where I have made the largest mistakes in my life, I would say career mistakes, it's because I didn't listen to the spirit-driven voice of reason that my wife gave me.
Yeah.
Because she's such a prayerful person, and I would go, I'm forging ahead. And
do this thing. Knock down walls. That's what I do. Knock down Raging Bull. Raging Bull. That was a great movie. Yeah, I'm a Raging Bull. One time my wife Judy came to me and she said, I don't know. She turned to me. Let me put it that way. And she said, I'm not one of your employees.
I've heard that before. Where have I heard that before?
Dude,
they treat me like one of your employees.
Not one of your employees. Okay. So, okay. It's not declarative. It's a suggestion. Here's my suggestion. I
want to comment on that thing you said about how important that quick to listen, so to speak.
Yeah.
That was a real learned, I had to learn that. And that was the Holy Spirit helping me because
to learn to practice it.
I had to learn to practice it. I had to learn, I had to go, shut up. I had to have this internal thing help me to shut up. I'll tell you what helped me do that. Yeah. I wrote a book because I am a voracious reader. And I think, Paul, this book's probably well over 30 years old. It was by Chuck Swindoll. I like Chuck Swindoll books. I've got so many of them. But this one was one called Stress Fractures was the name of the book. And in it, Chuck Swindoll talks about the nature of a Christ-like leader versus the nature of what I would call a non-Christ-like leader. Okay, a Christ-like leader is tolerant, calm, relaxed, and patient. It doesn't mean that they're a pushover or they're not competitive, because I'm all those things. But when I read the opposite of that, it was me. And here's the opposite. So a Christ-like leader is tolerant, calm, relaxed, and patient.
I love that.
The opposite is, which is my nature, critical, emotional, tense, and impulsive. That was
wound tight and getting it done.
Exactly.
Did that come out of, that sounds like, that sounds like Southside Chicago. That sounds like some of that upbringing.
I grew up in a incredibly critical, emotional, tense, and impulsive, and it was a very physical environment.
Yeah.
But I grew up in that. And as a leader, and I began to grow, and I became more influenced by Christ and his teachings and trying to be a biblical versus a cultural Christian, which is two different things. I said to myself, you can never attain what God wants you to attain as a leader, and you can never be the leader / mentor that he wants you to be. You better get to the tolerant, calm, relaxed, and patient part.
Wow.
Or because you're critical, emotional, tense, and impulsive ain't going to get it. So this is literally what I did for, I'd say, 15 years of corporate America. I would go into meetings, and at the top of the page, I would put TC TRP, tolerant, calm, relaxed, and patient. I would put those letters.
Wow.
And I can't tell you how many people would walk by in different organizations and go, "What's that? What do you got up? What is that?" And
I think there's some guys listening right now that need to tattoo that on the palm of their hand.
Well, I got to
And
tell
just
you,
every so often, like you used to put the answers to tests.
yeah,
Not that we ever did that. You know, that some
We
smart
started,
girl
we
gave you.
just
Yeah.
started.
Just like put that like a tattoo. Like there it is. Okay.
It's it. It is.
Oh my
It is.
goodness.
When I
That's
learned
fantastic.
to be tolerant, calm, relaxed, and patient, it changed who I was as a husband, who I was as a father, who I was as
Wow.
a brother, as a son,
Wow.
as a leader. It changed everything. But I
Wow.
will tell you this. Inside of me, we all have demons to fight. That's in there. There's a violent, critical, emotional, tense, and impulsive guy.
Yeah.
But I don't
Yeah.
live that because the Holy Spirit got a hold of me and went, "Nah, pal,
Well,
that's not it."
yeah, there is that redemptive part of us in which the sanctification of Christ begins to change the way we think, but there's
Yeah.
still that we're still human.
Yes.
You know, it's kind of like when the disciples were on a boat and they're going across a lake and there's a storm and Jesus is asleep. And they're like, dude, he's asleep. We're going to die. Like, and some of these guys are trained, you know, seamen. And so they're not like, they shouldn't be afraid, but they're like, dude, this is really bad. So you look at a fisherman and he's scared. You're like, dude, we're going to die. And they wake Jesus up and he goes, dude, what's the deal? Where's your faith? But he didn't put him down for being human.
Yeah.
He didn't say to them, hey, you guys shouldn't be human, because he knows we're human, which is why Christ came. God knew we needed a savior. So in our humanity, he, if you will, there's these things in us that rise up. I mean, you know, everybody, whoever drives on a freeway anywhere in any populous city in the world is going to have something rise up at some point where they want to wave at a guy and go, dude, you are number one.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? So, you know, there's that thing. And so that's that deal where that self-talk, if you will, Fred, has to come back and say, but here's who I am. Here's my identity. My definition is TCRP. My definition is that I am going to be that. I'm going to be that man who actually, okay, we're going to dial it down right now. And before it comes out of my mouth, in my head, I'm going to dial it down.
It's a difficult transition. I had someone who worked with me. She was my assistant at a company. And when I started practicing this, and it was at a Christian organization, she worked with me for several years. She saw the change.
Wow.
She saw it. And one time I came into my office and she had put this really beautifully well-made thing in this heavy plexiglass holder. And I walked to my office. It was sitting on my desk. Boy, I can get so emotional over this stuff.
Wow.
And here's what it said: exercise your authority with grace. And I said, what is this? And she said, this is what you do. This isn't what you used to do many years ago.
Wow.
Because there's a brick wall and it's in my way. But this is who you are. And I love watching this because I see people grow and develop through that. But it was encased and it said, exercise authority with grace. And I got to tell you, I sat there for hours looking at it going, the Lord has so much grace with me that grace is a hard concept for me. The concept I don't think is hard, but accepting it, difficult. And
tell me about how everything shifted for that little 8-year-old boy. Look at his dad with tears in his eyes.
I'll tell you what it did. I learned so much from him, but he was, God used him from that day on. He was such a spirit for a little boy. He ended up, after 1 year of college, Paul, he came to me. We were living in Michigan. I'm down in the basement watching a football game. And he comes to me and he had finished his first year of college. He was 2 weeks from, I think, the new semester starting. And I knew who he was in the Lord, but he came to me and said, Dad, said, it's been a long, travel and, long road. I was like, you're 19. You haven't gone down a long road yet. And he said, but God's moving me towards ministry and it's not here. And I said, well, what do you mean it's not here? And he goes, it's not here. It's not in the United States.
Mm.
And I said, no, God's moving you towards getting your second year of college started in 2 weeks. He said, no. He said, you've taught me that I need to follow God's prompting and teaching.
Mm.
And he said, I don't know what that means, but it means I need to do this. And I said, son, and he goes, he got me, Paul. It was like, I told him it's really unfair. He goes, Jesus told Peter to lay down his nets.
Wow.
And I went, do you know how unfair that is? And I said, and I looked at him and I go, but I get it. I know what path you've been on. I don't know what that means. I will tell you this, within 4 weeks, he had found a ministry in England that sent youth people all around the world.
Wow.
To start youth. And he ended up in Northern Ireland 5 weeks later on his own doing youth ministry all across Northern Ireland.
Wow.
And he and I have talked many times I said, son, I think your strength and my strength, because you gave it to me, I can trace that back to an 8-year-old boy.
Wow.
Looking at me in the face going, Daddy, when you told me you were going to do something. And, we were heavy church people and deep involved in everything. And in his mind, it was like when somebody of faith says they're going to do something and they don't do it. And we traced it back to that. So it's incredible how, when I can look back and see how God has worked,
Number one, the first ministry for a man is to his family. And if you're listening right now, if you're listening or watching and you say, well, I'm single or whatever, there's a community that needs you. There's a community of young men that needs you. So, number one, get plugged into a local church. This is part of what happened in your life, right, Fred?
Yes, absolutely.
Get plugged into a local church, get involved in the community, and then out of that will come relationships, and then make yourself available. It is so easy to be negative. It's so, in fact, it doesn't take any work to be a mediocre man, first of all. Secondly, it's really easy to tear stuff down. All you got to do is get on Facebook and just throw crap around to people.
Yeah.
And the hard thing is actually building something. It's, if you will, to put yourself out there and say, hey, here's a young man. There's an event Saturday at our church. And I know that his mom, she doesn't know what to do. So you go to her and you say, hey, if you'll bring him Saturday, he'll sit with me. I'll be there for the event for him. And then afterwards, I'll take him out for a bite to eat. And then what's your address? I'll drop him off at the house. Just that kind of thing. You don't know what that will do to a young man's life, what that could do. I mean, those are simple. I mean, I'm thinking of the simplest thing we can do, Fred, because we complicate it. We make all these barriers in our brain. Well, how do I talk to a 14-year-old? I don't know what to say. Just talk to him like a person.
I'll tell you, when we went to see my son, we went to visit him in Northern Ireland, and I wanted to go back to where part of my family came from, which was down in the Republic of Ireland. But we were up in Northern Ireland, and everywhere we went, Paul, all these small little villages and places, they all knew my son.
Wow.
Oh, you're Joe's dad. Oh, yeah. And I was like, I don't know what he did. I don't know what he did, but they all knew him. But you know what he did? He made people feel special by just talking with them and including them and inviting them to things. He gave them self-worth from saying, you're important to me. And because you're important to me, I want you to be a part of this with me. You can choose to do it or not do it. And everywhere we went, I mean, to tell you, these tiny little villages, there was not even a road going through them. They all knew Joe. That's my son. They all knew who Joe was. And they went, yeah, Joe invited me to do this, or Joe came here and helped us cut this tree down, or Joe did this with us. And it was out of service and letting people know you're important. Even though you may not really know me, you're important. You're important.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
like,
and
wow.
now there's a lot of young men in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, who call him Coach Ick.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, dude, that is it, man. I mean, you think about all the accolades you've had in business, and you've been with some major corporations. You've helped people strategize and organize major events or big sales things. You've hit numbers. You've done this and that. But, dude, rolling up to a little village in Northern Ireland.
Oh.
And somebody going, yeah, your son. That's it, man, right there.
My life was fulfilled, honestly. I remember looking up to the heaven, standing on the strand, the beach there of this little place that he lived. Port Rush is a little town that he lived in, and going, Lord, this is such a better man than I. He heard you. He's the best man I know. He literally is. He heard you. He answered you. And now he's bringing people to you. And it's just, it was awesome. You know, it was a cool thing. It really was.
It's amazing. Fred Ichniowski, it's been great hanging out with you on Brave Men.
You too.
These are the kinds of conversations that, for me, help us, if you will, dial in. You know, so here I am driving in my car to my shop in Flagstaff, or you know, I'm sitting in a cafe in Uganda or wherever many of our friends are listening right now, our brothers. And there's these little moments where you say something like that TCRP, and all of a sudden something unlocks or something clicks, or it's like, hey, this guy loves boxing and he's still a Christian. You know, it's like, because you still do that. You're like, you told me you've come back and you're now still doing commentating on boxing.
Man, the fire hasn't left. I mean, I'm going to be doing something in the next couple of weeks on the radio about it. I mean,
the beautiful science.
It is, man. It's a different game than it used to be, but I still get excited about it. Hey, can I share one more leadership thing with you?
Please do. Yeah.
You know, my father, you know, I talked about him earlier being a self-educated man. He worked for a company for 42 years, which is what folks did then in his generation, stay with somebody. And it was the heating, air conditioning, you know, world that he lived in. And when I got into doing commercial real estate for some of the companies I worked with, one of the big things you always looked at negotiating was HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. Well, I was around it, in and around it for my whole life. And suddenly one morning I woke up at like 3 a.m. and I know it was God. And he said, listen, take what you were involved in your whole life growing up, and I'm going to give you something, and I want you to teach from that. So I took those letters, HVAC, and I turned them into what I think for me is the most powerful leadership tool that I've ever used. And I've taught it for over 20 years. And here's what that stands for. It's humility, vulnerability, accountability, and courage. And a leader needs to embody all of those things, Paul. But you can't be humble and you can't be vulnerable, and you certainly can't hold yourself accountable to your team unless you're courageous. And I'll tell you, I've worked with, you know, someone asked me the other day, how many CEOs have you either worked for or with? And it's close to 40.
Wow.
And I would probably say maybe 5 would embody those 4 things. Because they're difficult to do as a leader, whether you're in business or not, if you're a pastor, those things are difficult to do. But the ability to be humble, the ability to be vulnerable in front of the people that you're leading, to hold your, you know, accountability is many times thought of as I'm holding the team accountable. I'm holding an individual. No, man, you got to hold yourself accountable to the team. Accountability comes from the bottom up. The final piece of courage, you have to be courageous to embody those other three. And as a father and a husband and a grandfather of 2 granddaughters, scares me, but 2 granddaughters, I think about that all the time and go, they have to look at me as a model, and they have to go, they call me Daddo, my granddaughters, because
That's awesome.
That's the Irish slang for grandpa.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it.
So they call me Daddo, and I want them to look at Daddo and go, you know what? If Daddo's wrong, he'll admit he's wrong.
Yeah.
And, if Daddo says he's going to do something, he's going to do that. So I'm accountable.
It's so HVAC, humility, vulnerability, accountability, courage. Yeah, I think what you're talking about when you start talking about the first part is you're talking about internal.
Yes.
And then you're going to external. So you've got this internal, if you will, dialing into humility, which is, I heard this years ago, and I still like it a lot, which is humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And it's humility, it's the power of the life of Jesus Christ. Humility, I think of my friend Reggie White, who played football in Philadelphia and Green Bay.
He's a hero of mine.
Yeah. And I remember Reggie. I mean, this guy, I remember he went in a game against Larry Allen, against the Cowboys. Larry Allen was considered the strongest man in the NFL. Oh, yeah. Bench press 745 pounds, multiple times. And I remember Reggie was a defensive end, throwing Larry aside and just killing, Troy. 2 nights before that game was on Sunday. 2 days before that, on a Friday night, he's at our house on the floor with my 2 sons jumping off the back of the couch onto him. To me, what that was he didn't have to prove his strength.
That's right.
That's humility. He didn't have to say, hey, I can do this, I can do that. And so the strength was his inner strength, that character that didn't have to. See, the stronger a man is on the inside, the more gracious he can be on the outside. It's the man who's weak on the inside who tries to prove his strength on the outside. Oh, yeah, I did this, I did that. I won this award. I've got 22s on my car, whatever the thing is, And, but it was that true strength. And he had a true strength on the inside. He knew his strength. He knew who he was. He didn't have to prove it. And so here he is with the 2 little boys jumping on him from the back of the couch and him wrestling on the ground. And then 2 days later, he's destroying, Troy Aikman, throwing Larry Allen to the side, and a remarkable man. But the fact is, that's really what humility is to me, Fred. It's that ability to know who I am and not have to tell somebody or prove it. And then vulnerability, that is not an easy thing. So now you have to have humility to do that. That's vulnerability. That's internal. And then accountability is that self-talk of I'm holding myself accountable to myself, number one. And then we see the external, which is that courage. So character and then courage. And if you will, it's what's lacking in the world today.
I totally agree with you. Totally.
That's why we do what we do, why we're connected with men like yourself. And dude, thanks for jumping in and going, hey, there's one more thing. HVAC. Don't leave out the HVAC. That's fantastic.
I'll share that to people in Lowe's or Walmart if they give me a chance.
That's right.
That's just important. And I see too many leaders, and I'm a study of leaders. I have been, and it's been my passion, and God gave me that passion. But those 4 things, when he woke me up in the middle of the night and said, wow. You take this, use this acronym because you grew up with these letters.
Well, it's transportable. It's easy to carry.
It is. And you use it, and it's true. And I can't tell you the number of leaders that I have worked with or attached with, and they're missing 2 or 3 of these. And
oh no, I'm gonna preach this Saturday at a men's summit, and I'm gonna look like a genius, bro. I'm gonna be like, dude, where'd you get that? I don't know. Holy Spirit just dropped it in my heart.
You go ahead and do it, buddy. If it changes, if it gets men's lives in the right direction, go do it.
I don't know. I don't know. I was just thinking, I was looking up at the air conditioning.
I love it. I love it.
And then, the whole thing, it's a funny old deal, but I like it, which is the first time you hear something, you go, well, Fred Ichniowski taught me this. The second time he says, a great man I know once said. And the third time is, as I always say.
I have to watch myself because when I'm teaching stuff like this, tolerant, calm, relaxed, and patient, I can remember doing a training session at a company one time, and I took that as mine. And I felt so bad that I went back the next day and went, you know what? That came from Stress Fractures by Chuck Swindoll. But yeah, right. I had myself so convinced that I was on top of all of this, and I went, there's something I practice, and I call it this. And I was like, Lord.
Hey, it's okay. Because, and really it's a compliment when it becomes a part of your speech.
Yeah.
And what I love, you met my son, Bryce, who's our producer. And, I hear things sometimes will come back and I'll go, dude, that is awesome. My son, Brandon, who's a fantastic pastor, and he'll say something, or one of the grandchildren, and I'll go, I think I actually said that to them. And now it's part of their speech.
Yeah, you gotta love it.
Yeah. That to me is legacy, man, because, what you do in life becomes history, but what you put into motion becomes your legacy. And so when you speak that into their lives and then it becomes part of that forward thing, dude, that's what life's about, man.
Yeah. Life becomes very simple. The older I get, my wife said I'm not allowed to say I'm old because then that makes her old. She said, don't ever quit talking about you're the old guy in the meeting because that makes me old. And she looks pretty close to how she looked 40 some odd years ago. I look like a hobbit. She looks almost the same. I don't understand it. I just don't understand it.
So Judy, we were married for a long time, and starting somewhere around 35 years of marriage, she would say, don't tell people how long we've been married. Then once we tipped over 50, and now we're into our 50s years of marriage, she's like, yeah, go ahead. Doesn't matter. Tell everybody. We're in our 53rd year of marriage, and it's all right. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's all good. Hey, Fred Ichniowski, it's been great spending time with you, man, and hearing some of these things and getting this stuff into our heart and our spirit. And I just pray in these days ahead for Fred and Jill, and your consulting, mentoring, coaching, whatever those things are. I pray every place that the Lord takes your feet to be holy ground, and everything your hands get put to, and everything he puts in your hands, that it would prosper, and that he would grant you great favor in the days ahead. And thanks for being with us on Brave Men, bro.
Thanks, Paul. I'll end my time with you as I do on the radio when I'm doing my boxing segment. And I will tell you this, always in your corner. Don't forget that.
I love it. Got your back.